Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Kay, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Here in the Providence College Podcast, we bring you interesting stories from the Friar family. This week, we're speaking with Liz Duffy, a member of the class of 2023. Duffy was a recipient of the Father Smith Fellowship for Service and Study Abroad. Thanks to the fellowship, the Rhode Island native spent the summer in Geneva, Switzerland. While there, she worked with Dominicans for justice and peace, drafting statements to be presented to the United Nations Human Rights Council. It was the perfect assignment for Duffy, who's majoring in both humanities and theology. Liz, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Can you give us a little background about the Father Smith Fellowship?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a program designed for students to basically create any independent proposal for study or service abroad anywhere in the world, as long as there are Dominicans there that are working. And so basically the student designs their own program, and they're responsible for communicating with the location and setting things up, and then they can apply it after they've done that for the actual fellowship, which covers all the costs that are necessary for the travel and the study. And then, you're helped by staff in campus ministry and mission and ministry to basically find a place to live, find maybe other students who might be going to your location. And typically, in years past, there have been between 8 and 10 people who were awarded fellowships, but this year it was just two of us this past summer. Yeah.
And how did you get familiar with Dominicans for Justice and Peace?
I actually, Father Peter Martyr Youngworth, who was chaplain here for a long time, he put me in contact with the general promoter of the delegation for the Dominican order. And so I had an interview with him over the summer and just learned a little bit more about it. And then Pam Tremblay, who works in mission and ministry now, also knew about it, and she thought it would be perfect for me. And so just conversation with them.
So tell us a little bit about your placement there.
Yeah, so they have 3 offices: Nairobi, Vienna, and Geneva. But Geneva is their biggest office, and primarily because that's the location of one of the UN offices is in Geneva. And so basically I was in my title was an intern in the office, but I was responsible for a few different things on the day-to-day. But a big part of my experience was the researching and kind of just learning about the processes at the UN, and also just about what it means to be an NGO, because it's obviously a different experience than a diplomat. So I attended many of the sessions at the UN, which was really cool. And I'd be responsible for kind of listening to the statements of from other countries, from other NGOs, and then reporting back to my supervisor about what they said. And so it was basically a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And then I would travel on the weekends and everything, which was really cool.
What were some of the highlights of the experience?
Well, I had one really cool project that they gave me that took me a long time. But basically, the project was to draft something to be given to the Dominican friars at the general chapter of the order, which they hold every 4 years. And this year was in Mexico. And basically, the order comes together and they talk about what kind of projects that they're undertaking around the world, and whether they should be continued to be invested in kind of their progress and what they're accomplishing. And so the general promoter of the order at this delegation asked me to basically put something together for him to present at the general chapter, which felt like a big project. And it was actually very rewarding because it was kind of a question that I had going in was well, obviously the Dominican friars are known for their preaching, for their intellectual life, but they're typically not as invested in social justice per se as maybe other orders like the Franciscans, for example. And so this was my question, why the friars, why this work? So basically what I did was I went through the fundamental constitutions of the order to see okay, what is the purpose of the Dominican friars and how does that relate to this work in particular? And I had to come up with basically a kind of visual with information for him to present. And it was really cool. It took me a long time, but it was really rewarding because it answered my very question. And how it ended up turning out was basically there were kind of 3 ways that the charism of the order related to the work. And it was preaching, because in a certain sense they're going and preaching the truth of human dignity to this group of people at the UN. Community, because a lot of the work that the delegation does is with other communities of Dominicans around the world. And then just their engagement with intellectual life, because so much of it is has to do with thinking and contemplating and, really being invested in the intellectual life. And so it was a really cool project. Yeah, that was a big highlight for me, definitely.
That's awesome. And so basically like trying to find these threads between the work that you're doing and the mission of the Dominicans.
Exactly. Yeah.
It seems like a great culminating opportunity for you as a theology major who's been involved in campus ministry and many other things at PC. What other opportunities have you had during your college career that helped prepare you for this?
I would say in a big way, when I came to PC, I was a poli-sci major. And I quickly realized that that's not what I wanted to study, but I never thought I would study theology. But I happened to pick up a class. And when I dropped my poli-sci class, I picked up a theology class, and I fell in love with it. And I was shocked because I didn't have a very strong faith life. I was really interested in deep questions, but I'd kind of rejected a little bit of what I had been taught in my early life. And I was trying to be a very independent thinker and, all these things. And but I fell in love with it. And I found that it had the answers to the questions I'd been searching for my whole life. Why am I here? What does it mean to be a human being? What was I created for? All these things. And so really my theology classes gave me a very strong anthropological understanding, which has framed the rest of the stuff that I've done at PC and just in general. And so I would say my course of study has really formed me in that way. And then just involvement with campus ministry too. I was a part of the peer ministry program for 2 years. And so I met a lot of people with beautiful, beautiful faith lives and had some experience in kind of leading some small groups and that sort of thing too. And then I would say a big challenge for me of the Smith Fellowship was being alone because I was totally by myself. And I think that a big part of the reason why I was able to do that was because I had a lot of support coming from here, just through communication with friends and with staff and with the friars, and I felt very, very well supported. But also I think, honestly, so this is a benefit of COVID, I guess, but just that things became more isolated, and so you're more independent, more responsible in certain ways. And so my dependence on God really increased during COVID. And I was able to really rely on that too when I was abroad, which was really, really helpful. So, yeah.
Because you didn't get a chance to study abroad during one of the academic semesters.
No. Sorry, I mean abroad. Yeah.
It sounds like your faith life really deepened while you were at PC. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I was raised Catholic. I come from a big Irish Catholic family. But in high school, I really started to ask myself whether I believed in God, if I really believed in the Catholic faith. And I began to read for classes in high school some other thinkers like Ayn Rand, who's a libertarian thinker, and even Karl Marx and these socialist thinkers. And it was the first time I've been presented with so many different views. And I was well, there is really a lot out here to consider. And so I kind of got to the place of basically, I would say agnostic, where I was just really trying to explore and think deeply about these things, but I wasn't committed to any particular thing. And I didn't think I would come to PC either, actually, even though 2 of my siblings came here and my parents both came here too. So we're a friar family. But again, part of my sort of rebellious time was I'm going to get out and I'm not going to go where other people have gone. But I ended up here, and I've been so happy that I did. It was very providential for me to be here. But the first thing I was introduced to was the community and campus ministry. I did FaithWorks, which is a pre-orientation program. And it was the first time I met people who really had a deep sense of their love for God, and it showed in their joy and their radiance, and they wanted to talk about it, and they wanted to help you understand it. And I had never really had that experience before, and so it's very tangible, very real. And then the other part of it was the sort of intellectual side of things with the friars. They had the answers to my questions, and they taught them to me in a way that was caring and allowed me to continue asking questions and not sort of not sort of just like tell you that this is true and that's sort of the end of the road. It's more like, this is why we believe this to be true, but here's all these other things that you're probably thinking about. And then we would like have these conversations that would really help me further understand. And so that kind of patience and honesty really helped me a lot. And then after that, I just started going to adoration all the time in St. Dom's and Mass and everything. And grace worked in me, and here we are. And so I have a very deep faith life now, which I'm incredibly grateful for. Yeah.
And you weren't kidding about your very friar family, right? So,
yeah.
How many siblings do you have?
I have 5 siblings.
You have 5 siblings.
Yes.
So of your family of 6 children, 3 of you have become
yes.
PC students. So what tipped the scales for you and actually convinced you that PC was the right place?
So I actually really wanted to go to Villanova, which is where one of my other brothers went. And I didn't get in. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll go to PC for a year and then transfer. That was my plan. And I had spent a week here. And I said, I called my parents and I said, I'm not leaving. I said, there's no way I can leave. And so, yeah, it was the people I met, and it was the sort of community I felt, which is a cliche that sometimes people say is a cliche that we use all the time for our family, but it is very true. And yeah, I've been incredibly happy here.
That's wonderful. So what were some of the things in that first week that sealed the deal for you that made you realize that this was, in fact, the right decision?
A big part of it was I had met people who were really interested in answering the same questions I was. In high school, I didn't really have that. It was kind of like, let's pursue these questions, not as a means of getting to the truth, but just as a kind of means of, for the sake of asking deep questions. So there's a kind of just different purpose there. And I could tell, and even my friends. And here it was like we would have these conversations at midnight, like by the flame. Like we would just have these very deep conversations. And I finally met people who were interested in having those conversations, which was really special to me. And like I said, seeing the faith life in my friends too, and in the friars, it was a totally different way of living than I had ever seen. And it just impacted me very deeply. And the friars too. They've been a huge part of my experience, and very supportive. And I remember at the end of FaithWorks, we had a sort of like reflection time, and the Pam Tremblay, who was the director at the time of the program, said, like, if anyone has anything they'd like to share, please feel free. And I remember standing up and saying, for the first time in a really long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I know you all have a big role to play in that for me. And I like start to cry a little bit. And that even didn't feel like me. I just felt very like moved to say that. And but it was true. It was true. I felt like this was the place I'd been called to be. Even though I didn't really know it, I wouldn't have said that at the time. I wouldn't have known what that was like. But yeah. So some of it's, and I'm not able to articulate, but those are some big things, big parts of it.
And so now looking back on it as a senior, what are some of the classes and other experiences that stand out for you as like kind of like core memories from your PC experience?
Yeah, I would say the Civ program, which I love. A lot of people complain about it, but I absolutely love the Civ program. And that program is part of what led me to be a humanities major, because I loved that it was interdisciplinary. One day I'd be, reading a novel that would be carrying the same themes as this philosophical text, and I got to really engage with it in a new way. So Civ, definitely. I took a class called Theology and Political Life with Dr. Rick Barry, which was really great. And that, I think, prepared me very well, actually, to be kind of combining my interests in like politics, which I've always had, and theology, and like how these kind of conversations that I think helped prepare me for my work in Geneva in a big way too. Just thinking about things in a particular way, and so that class definitely. I've taken a lot of classes on Aquinas' thought, which have been really great too. I've probably taken maybe 4 at this point between philosophy and theology, which there's a lot of overlap. So maybe, let's see what else. I also took this class, Dominican Intellectual Tradition, with Father Irenaeus last semester, which was really great. The class kind of had like two main parts, and he kind of framed it like in a very Aristotelian way, like form and matter of the order, of the Dominican order. So kind of the form being the sort of general purpose of the order, a little bit of St. Dominic's life, and then the matter being kind of more of like, here are particular Dominican friars who have lived out these aspects of the charism of the order. And I felt like I just had a really like deepened understanding of the Dominicans, and I knew where to look too for answers to those questions after that class. But yeah, I mean, we read a really cool book in that class too called Lost in Thought by Dr. Zena Hitz. And it was really interesting. And it actually led me to really think about the intellectual life very deeply. One thing she talks about is it's the vice of achadia, but it basically means a kind of like laziness or sloth when it comes to actually using your leisure time well. And it prompted me to like really think about that. And I ended up actually planning, I've been trying to get, I don't know if you're familiar with the Thomistic Institute. So we've been trying to kind of deepen our relationship with them as like between PC's campus and the Thomistic Institute. And so I put together.
People who don't know it though, could you talk a little about it?
Yeah. So the Thomistic Institute is a project set up by the Dominican friars of the Eastern Province. Basically, its main purpose is to bring the Catholic and Dominican tradition to secular campuses. And so I tried to get a chapter started here, but because we're already Dominican college, it didn't make much sense. But they have a lot of media and stuff that's designed to kind of bring it to campuses where the Dominican friars aren't physically present. So they have this program called Aquinas 101, where they have like students come together and just read an article of the Summa and talk about it, which is cool. And then they run retreats, intellectual retreats, where they have speakers from all different colleges, not necessarily Catholic colleges, and come and speak on a particular topic. So they're based in Washington, D.C., like very much near the Dominican House of Studies, where the friars study when they're becoming priests. But so anyway, I put together an intellectual retreat basically for PC students at the Dominican House of Studies on this topic of achadia. And so that was really, that I wouldn't have done had I not read this book and taken this class. So that's very cool.
One of the things you got to take advantage of here at PC was the new classes as part of the Catholic Humanities minor. Can you tell us some of the highlights of those courses?
Yeah, definitely. So they formed this minor, I think it was last year is when they created it. And I know that they've been trying to build the humanities program in general. They have a really cool set of opportunities, including like the Humanities Forum, which I'm sure a lot of students are familiar with. But they have a speaker come, and then they have an opportunity for students to have like a meal with the speaker afterwards and continue the conversation. And so anyway, I think the Catholic Humanities minor kind of came out of people had an interest in philosophy and theology and in all these areas of the humanities, but particularly with like the Catholic tradition and how that's informed that area of thought. And so I know they have a couple of courses, the Catholic Intellectual Tradition course, the Dominican Intellectual Tradition course, which I took. And then they have a really cool set of these like 1 credit courses that you can take in so many different things. I've taken 2 of them, one on Walker Percy and one on Gregorian chant, which is so interesting in a good way, interesting in a good way. So basically it's a 6-course minor, I'm pretty sure. But you have to take one of those Dominican or Catholic Intellectual Tradition courses and the intro course to humanities, which is kind of like a survey of some influential texts from like the 1718 and 1900s. And to kind of give you a sense of, it's actually somewhat like Civ in the sense of interdisciplinary. I took it with Dr. Patrick McFarlane, and we read novels and we read philosophical texts and we read a little bit of theology. And so it was cool to have that kind of interdisciplinary approach. But Yeah, it's very flexible. You can take, those are the only 2 requirements. So outside of that, you can take any 4 classes in the humanities disciplines, which there are 6 or 7 of. So it's very flexible and open.
Yeah. PC doesn't offer a ton of those 1-credit classes, but I think some of them, there's one on stargazing.
Yes, there is. Yep. Yeah.
So it's a pretty wide range of opportunities there.
Yeah, definitely.
Like any good PC student, though, I think you might have some intramural accomplishments to be proud of as well.
Yes, of course. 2 shirts to the 3v3 basketball, which I'm very proud of. Very proud of.
Did it take you a long time to acquire those, or was
actually freshman year? Yeah, I did win freshman year, which was great. I really thought at that point, I was like, wow, I'm going to win one every semester, but it did not happen. And then last year, junior year, in the fall.
But you checked it off the bucket list right away.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I can graduate now.
But speaking of graduation, it's a rare conversation with a college senior that does not end in. So what are your post-graduation plans?
Course,
you know, what are your ambitions and thoughts about what happens after May?
Yeah, so I thought a long time, basically the whole time I've been here, that I would get my master's in theology and then hopefully get my PhD in theology and be a college professor. That's kind of what I really wanted to do. But recently I've been thinking about not doing that for a couple of reasons. I love theology and I would love to study it forever. But I also have been thinking more about what might be a good way of combining that passion with something that might have a few more jobs out there for me. So there are a couple of different options I'm looking at. The Dominican student actually has a fellowship program that I'm looking into in Washington, D.C. And before I came to PC2, the thing I always thought I would do was go to law school. And so I'm putting that back on the table a little bit and hoping to work in a law firm next year and just see if I enjoy the environment and the work. And I think that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. So I don't want to go to school right away. I need a little break. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
If you were considering law school, what type of law do you think you'd practice?
I'm not sure. A lot of this thought came from being in Geneva, because I'm also very passionate about the pro-life movement and just questions of human dignity in general. And so I would love to kind of work for an institution or organization that is promoting things that I believe in. And so I don't think like the corporate law side is really for me, but maybe something like constitutional law could be cool. Any kind of organization that needs like a legal advisor for that kind of work, for that kind of those cases of human dignity would be really cool for me.
Be remiss not to mention that your father might be a familiar person to some students at PC's campus.
Yeah.
As an attorney who's taught business law.
Yes, he taught business school. Yes, exactly. Yeah, he did. So he does business litigation. Which again, I don't know that I would do that kind of law, but in talking to him too has been very informative for me about thinking about law school. And he came here, he was an English major here, and he didn't go to law school right away either. And he's always told us, like any of my siblings and me, if we're thinking about law school, to not go right away, and to work first. And that's what he did. And he went to night school and he worked for 3 years, and he was already married. My parents got married at 22, so they were already getting ready to have a family. And but it's been very helpful too, because he's done this, so it's been great. Yeah.
Well, Liz, it's been wonderful to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Absolutely.
Subscribe to the Providence College Podcast in all the usual places, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, as well as your smart speaker. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Thanks for listening, and go Friars.